stage. Turn this thing up.
We are joined now by the biggest guest we've ever had on the Read Option, by far. So cracking off this new wave. We just had our 100th episode, and so we have to make sure we get, stuff for the people. And we're joined by one of the best college quarterbacks of all time, a good buddy of mine as well, Mr. Ryan Leaf. Leafy, what's going on, buddy?
Good to be here, man. It's good to see you in your element. Just excited for you and glad to be a part of it, man.
Yeah, no, excited. Ryan Leaf, you can catch him literally everywhere, dude. You're at ESPN, Sky Sports, Westwood, obviously Sirius XM, and your podcast Bust, which I just listened to for the second time this week, is on anywhere you can get your podcast. Just an absolutely amazing story. You're so candid, you're so open about everything that's happened in your life, and I love all the guest speaking stuff you do now. It's so amazing. And I was curious because you've told your story in a lot of different facets, right? There's been countless articles written about it. There's an E60 about it. What was the driving force and kind of the impetus behind wanting to do it in a different platform? What was so attractive about doing a podcast version of this that is really you narrating your whole story?
Well, I feel like, thank you. First off, it was a passion project. I had initially taken this idea to some of the networks and some other outlets in terms of content. And we were trying to sell it as a docuseries called Busts. And it would have been me visiting different individuals in different genres of sports who had a ton of expectation on them that didn't necessarily meet those expectations. And I'd be the one interviewing them because I knew exactly what it was like to be cast aside and that word being used. So I thought it would work really well. And I thought we had it sold a couple different times. Just didn't quite get it done. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, I ran into a producer friend of mine, and him and I kind of just started spitballing some ideas around, well, let's give somebody an idea of what this would look like. And I'll be the guinea pig. I'll do it. It's my story in my words. Most of those other things that you talked about in terms of the E60 and articles and, little document, things like that. I have no say in any of that, right? The only thing I have saying is the questions they asked me, how I answer them. Yeah. And who knows how they edit them. I mean, I remember doing the E60 and the producers wouldn't even let me see it the night before. Right. Really? So that didn't make me feel good about it. And then they were asking me to go on ESPN and do their car wash and promote it all day. And I'm like, I don't know what this is going to look like, So I think it was important for me because it's a story that's been told by a lot of people and not me. I've never really commented on it and some of the things that no one has any idea about. And I thought it was going to be important for individuals who have family members who struggle, people who are incredible athletes growing up and are struggling with the competition aspect of things. I mean, I think a lot of people also assume that my story is a cautionary tale. Don't do what I do, but you had to have done a bunch of good stuff to get to that place. And I think people forget that and how you go about it. So how you evolve once you get there. And I think it's a story that stands the test of time. And I think it will help people. And I think, like anything, you can listen to it tomorrow or 5 years from now or when you need it. It's 10 episodes. It's not been asked to maybe add to more episodes and just kind of start being a podcast. And I don't know if that's maybe I find a different format to do that in, but this in itself, all by itself, at 10 episodes stands alone. And I stick by that.
And it's so great in that aspect too. You were saying being able to control the narrative, right? It's a lot of things we've seen with the Players Tribune have done a lot of similar things, right? Give the athletes and the people who experience this the platform to tell their own story. And it's something that I think one of the few great things we have about social media nowadays, right? Because it can always be so hit or miss, but giving athletes and people who've experienced great things and have gone through struggles as well, then an opportunity to express themselves and tell their story.
I do think to that end, the person has to be like transparent and vulnerable and accountable. Like if you take that platform and just use it to blame and to play the victim and things like that. I don't think that benefits anybody. There has to be a realness to it. And I think that was what it was set forth. My producer friend, who any of you Entourage fans out there remember the character E, his name's Kevin Connolly. And there had to be a trust there, right? My wife also produced it, and she knows my story like nobody else's. So when I was in there talking, you know, she could look at me and go, hey, you know, you're embellishing that a little bit to make yourself sound better. And those are things that I'd done in the past. So they were able to call me on my shit. It's a big reason why we want to go on and do season 2, season 3, and attack some other genres of sport. And for me to be in the room there and like that, know that they can feel comfortable, but I can also know when they're feeding me a line, because I know exactly what it felt like when you're walking down the street and somebody yells out something, or on all the social media platforms, people just love to go at you and use the word bust and things like that. No matter what you say or how you say it, it affects you unless you learn how to destigmatize it and take all power away. And this was a big part of that.
Well, and I think that's what makes it so great. You can tell it's authentic, you know, and there's even moments in there when you're telling a story and you kind of call yourself like an asshole. You're like, God, I was an asshole. You know what I mean? Like, and that's the authenticity that makes this kind of thing work. And that was actually kind of where I wanted to go here. Is there was a line you said in the second episode, and I think I remember you had recorded it that day, or you were telling me and Horowitz about it whenever we were doing a show that night. And you might have used the same line, but you said, I'm an egomaniac. I was an egomaniac with a self-esteem problem. And that's such a great little clip of self-awareness. And that's a big thing for me, just as a person in general, is that concept of self-awareness. And I'm curious as to how do you think that manifested in your day-to-day life? Like, do you feel the two fed into each other? Was it a projection, or did it feel more like Jekyll and Hyde, where, you know, when you needed offensive linemen to walk you down the campus, that was isolating in a lot of ways, and then on the football field you could then be this competitive monster that could kind of let all that aggression out?
Yeah, it was exactly that, right? It like anything, you want to be recognized for the star that you are, but you don't actually feel that way at home when you look in the mirror. Like you see the person, everybody else sees the player, and they don't coexist. Like, and I couldn't make it work where I could see how the same person could behave the same way. Like, could I behave like the kind, considerate individual at home with family and friends and stuff like that? Or was it on the field, I had to be a monster, right? I had to compete about everything. It worked. It got me to the highest level possible of what I wanted to do in a sport. But it just shows you, once you get there, if you're not able to evolve, and you don't have to be a good person. I mean, we've seen plenty of people who are not great people be really great football players. It's a matter of how you deal with it, right? And how you deal with failure, how you get past it, how you take in what other people are saying. And because I was an egomaniac with a self-esteem problem, when people were extremely critical and were shaming, like, I got so defensive, and all my attention was placed in other places and not where it was supposed to be directed to.
Yeah. It's so fascinating to me. And that's the side of athletes that I think we understand it a little bit better now, again, through things like Kevin Love is a go-to example for me. You know, I think in the sports world in particular, really shifted the conversation about mental health. And I think culturally we've adjusted and we've grown to seeing, like, he had an anxiety, he had a panic attack on an NBA court, you know, like trying to process that where you have thousands of fans screaming at you, yelling at you, and having had panic attacks myself, that's a horrifying feeling. And when you are at that highest level, and you think about The Last Dance, right? Michael Jordan sitting alone in a hotel room, smoking a cigar, it can be, yeah, I achieved all this greatness, but I also feel as alone as I've ever felt, because there's not a lot of people who can relate to that.
Well, I think that you also, even though there may be truth to that, I think we also, buy into it too. Like, we are unique. Like, yeah, I guess Michael Jordan can say that I'm the greatest basketball player ever, but yeah, there's a way for you to compartmentalize that and still be engaging. Otherwise, even though, I mean, you are you are implicit in making that outcome a reality, that you're sitting alone in a hotel room. You've played into that, right?
Yeah.
And so it's important for you to have a grounding method, right? A way for you to ground yourself, to make sure like, okay, I'm not more important than anybody else. I'm a great basketball player, or I'm a great football player. That doesn't make me more important or less important than anybody else. There may be some unique qualifiers to that, because I can't go too many places without being recognized or hounded for autographs and things like that, or pictures. Those are unique qualifiers. But
Yeah.
able to look in the mirror and go, okay, I'm a flawed human being, just like everybody else, trying to get better in what I do. That's an incredibly accepting and surrendering moment. And a lot of us don't ever get there until we're almost forced to.
Yeah. So you kind of hit that rock bottom. And I'm not a big fan of hypotheticals and a wide, for a bunch of reasons, right? But I'm curious, for your instance, do you feel like your career and the path that you went down was an inevitability, that because of kind of your upbringing and your experience at Washington State, that you were kind of not destined, but you were always kind of going down that track, that, it was always going to end up that way? And if maybe the idea of what we know about mental health now and the support and resources we have now for people you had back then, things might have been different.
I don't. I also know that if I ended up in another place, maybe it's a different story. Maybe I'm more successful because the players around me are better, and the character defects aren't found out until later on in my career or at the end of my career. Or I never address them at all, and I'm a 45-year-old asshole who played quarterback pretty well in the NFL, right? So
yeah,
I think it's important to recognize that it didn't sidetrack me in high school, didn't sidetrack me in college, didn't sidetrack me early on in the NFL. It just, once it happens at the highest level like that, there's no leeway, right? There's no gathering yourself, really. It's the epitome of the best of the best. And so most people don't get more than one shot. I got a couple shots. Like, most people don't. You get cut, you're done. I mean, you don't get another chance at it. And so you better make the most of it, or you'll be gone, because there's thousands of guys that are willing to fill your spot, period. And so I don't go into hypotheticals either, because I'm grateful for what happened. It was frustrating, and it was disappointing, and it was painful along the way.
Yeah.
But as is life for a lot of people, as it is for everybody, it's just not, you don't walk through unscathed. And that's just because a lot of people know my story because it was so public doesn't mean it's any different or it's any worse than anybody else's, just because people knew about it. In fact, it was probably something that ultimately saved my life, because I was forced to address it. I just couldn't disappear into the shadows like people who are going through the same type of things I was going through.
Yeah, no, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's interesting to think that being in the public image, though, might have had greater peaks and valleys, right? Ultimately was a thing that, like you said, saved your life, and is a big reason why you've been able to kind of turn things around. And that's one of the things I admire about you so much, and haven't gotten to know you for, got about 3 years or so. We worked together. I know this Ryan, right? I know this self-aware, confident, just like really nice guy, Ryan, who's so easy to talk to, who's so much fun to be around. And I'm fascinated that, if looking back, right, at the version of yourself in college and even in high school, as you're getting ready to go to Washington State, that ultra competitor, do you see a version of yourself now that existed, even a small essence almost of yourself that was in that person at the time, and you just kind of had to go through a lot of shit to get there?
Oh yeah. I mean, there are plenty of people who've had interactions with me who've come out over the years and said, we met once at this, that, and the other, and you were so kind, and you took time out to sign an autograph for my kid. And I mean, a lot of times when I met people, it was a one-time situation, right? It was a first impression, and you don't have an opportunity to make another first impression. If it's a bad one, that's it. That's
just how it is.
One of the biggest things that existed out there was me yelling at a reporter, right? Mm-hmm. And even to this day, like, a caricature of me is like, oh, that Ryan Leaf guy, the guy that yells at reporters. Mm-hmm. And I yelled at one reporter, but that's
what with you.
That's how it works. we're watching the winning time thing right now, and people associating Jerry West with throwing things everywhere. He's pissed about it. You know,
Yeah.
if he threw one thing one time ever in the office, it can be dramatized as him having just a crazy anger problem. And so you gotta understand that's how it goes. And but when you care so much about what other people think of you, it's tough. And back in the day when I was so good at what I did, it didn't matter if the people thought about me in a negative or positive way, as long as they were thinking of me. That's all I cared about. It didn't matter what it looked like. So I didn't have to worry about how I behaved. I just had to go out and compete and win. And if that's the case, I'd have 50% of the people in love with me and, 50% of the people that hated me. And that I was okay with that. I never had a problem with it because I could go compete and win. And when that went away, when I couldn't compete or I wasn't at the top of it anymore, like, the 50% that were on the great player side of things, like they fell off quick. And maybe the minority in the room, the minority voice in the room got louder and louder and louder.
Well, and you had a platform to make people talk about you too, right? Like you said, like if you wanted people to talk about you, I'm going to go throw for 400 yards against Cal and people are going to talk about me, And so for better, for worse, you had the ability to fulfill that when you wanted to. Talking about your football for a second, because I went through a rabbit hole on YouTube this morning watching your old highlights of Washington State, and god damn, were you fucking good, dude. Because you were, a lot of ways like Josh Allen. Like you were this massive, great athlete from, Northwest, right? And you were run guys over, you could throw the ball a mile. I didn't remember until listening to it today that Miami wanted you to come down, play linebacker or tight end. And that story of you in the back seat with Warren Sapp and The Rock was, that's just amazing, dude.
Yeah, but no one knew that they were Warren Sapp or The Rock at the time.
Yeah, right. I'm assuming they were probably both freshmen, right, or around that time.
Yeah, they were. I think they were around. I think The Rock was around junior and Warren was a sophomore, something. But anyway, yeah, I was. I think for the longest time I forgot how good a football player I was, simply because I was told how bad of a football player I was, and continue to be told that, and it just doesn't register like it used to. I started to believe it. Those were great times. I'm flying up to Pullman today. I'm calling the spring game for Pac-12 Networks this weekend. I'm bringing my family with me, my son and my wife. And so, it's wonderful to go back there and remember those days. We had a really good team. I had a really good coach. I don't think enough of that is mentioned when people talk about how great I was. I had a special group of people around me that made me, really good. And we got to experience some really neat things, got to be a Heisman Trophy finalist alongside 3 Hall of Famers. My coach got to be recognized as one of the best coaches in the country with awards on that end of thing. Washington State was talked about nationally. We got to play for a national championship, essentially. It was just, the greatest, all the things I'd worked towards, regardless of how anybody felt I behaved or did. It got me to the precipice of greatness, right? And that's what you would try to achieve. People may look at it and shake their head and go, I knew it. He would. Well, none of you got anywhere else behaving any other way. So I did what I had to do. There wasn't a trailblazer. The last guy that was drafted in the first round out of Montana was like in 1953. So, I didn't know how to do it. I mentioned in the podcast, it was like I was making an omelet. You break fucking eggs and you go, you
try to salvage as much of it as you can. Yeah. Was it difficult or maybe talk through the process of kind of reconciling that? Obviously you speak so fondly of your days playing, and that comes through in the podcast, right? Like you hear your voice light up, the tone of your voice lights up, and talking about, working out all summer and then going playing golf in Idaho until, it gets dark. Like, and I know you're a golf guy, so you're probably living in heaven during those days, right? What is it difficult knowing the path that football led you down? And again, you're happy and happy that you went through it because of where you are now. But was there moments where it was hard to kind of be like, I love football, I love what it gave me, but it also put me through hell in a lot of ways too?
Well, I think a lot of times during like the hell that you're talking about, I saw it as incredibly toxic. Like I would not watch NFL football. I can't remember if I really watched college football too. But I also was more invested in not feeling anything. And that was, you put a lot of time and effort into drug seeking. and trying to medicate your mental illness. Like it's all encompassing, you become addicted to the OCD of it, trying to figure it out. So if sports were brought up, if football was brought up, I think it would trigger a moment for me, like, especially if I didn't have any self-medicating ways at the time, to go out and seek it, right? That's what that did. It triggered that moment. So it was always a balancing act once I got out of prison on whether or not I wanted to delve back into the sporting world. I went to college trying to get a communications broadcasting degree. I liked talking about it. It reminded me of growing up with my dad sitting at the counter talking about every season of sport. And I felt like I could do it well. And so I just needed some people to help, support, and take a chance on me. And luckily, Steve Cohen really at Sirius XM was the first real guy to flat out say, "Hey, you've forgotten more football than most people will ever know."
Yeah.
And that was so confident building for me, because he wants me to go on NFL radio. Aren't people going to say, "Why would you have that bust on there?" And then my mindset would be like that instead of what I know and how I can talk about it. So yeah, for a while it was toxic. But I also know it gave me everything. Just absolutely gave me everything. The friendships, the maturing, the leadership qualities, and the experience to be good at what I do now. And it's helped me in other aspects of life, being a partner and a father, a better brother, better son, all those things.
And it's such a fascinating dichotomy, but ultimately the end result is, where you're at now, which is beautiful. Last thing I'll say here is just, I love how much you love your son. Like seeing, every time we work together, there's a new story, there's a new party, there's new this or that you're coming in. And again, when you hear your story, and I'm lucky enough to know you a little bit behind the scenes and call you a friend, it's so cool to me to see the way you light up. First thing you said on the Zoom was, "Oh, I'm chasing around the kid," and it's just a really beautiful thing, man. And it's so awesome to be able to be on the other side, getting a chance to see that and knowing everything you've gone through. And I think if people see that and how you post on social media about them, and then at the same time go and listen to your podcast, it's hard for anybody not to be rooting for you. And I know, your buddy Rich Eisen, and what he's done for you too, and being able to put you up it's really amazing, man. It's super great. I do want to get into some football stuff and some Pac-12 stuff, because you are as much of like a Pac-12, icon, for lack of a word. You pump up the league as much as anybody. And I think one of the biggest things that happened in honestly all of sports, because of I think the weight the Pac-12 can carry, but didn't get talked about a lot last year outside of our circle, because we're obviously in the college world, was George Kliavkoff taking over for Larry Scott. We're coming up on a year already, which is crazy since he's taken over. How would you grade, use whatever measuring system you want to use, George Kliavkoff's first year running the Pac-12?
I think he's done an exceptional job. The nuance behind expansion is a bit questionable, simply because he was one of the conferences that voted not for the expansion, but there were reasons behind it. But I just don't think anybody's willing to hear those reasons. People don't understand how important the Rose Bowl is to the Pac-12 conference. It is, I believe, the lone bowl game left that could stand on its own. Every other bowl game could go away and people would find different ways. The granddaddy of them all can't. And there were some licensing and TV rights issues that weren't necessarily readily available for the public. So the reaction immediately was swift. It was like, don't talk that nonsense and then go out and vote behind the back. I don't know if he expected it to get leaked. I mean, you have to. Everything is going to get leaked these days, any behind closed doors sessions. So that may be the only thing that I would say it was a bit troubling. The way he's gone about his business, how he's interacted with the universities, going to campuses, kind of grassroots, boots on the ground, acknowledging that the San Francisco property where the Pac-12 networks is situated at is just a money pit, and they have to move somewhere else and make it more affordable, and they can pump more money into the programs, which then the results are different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bottom line, expansion needs to happen. It has to for the Pac-12 conference, because it's too good from top to bottom, and to get through a season, especially a 9-game season, unscathed. And then you have these teams that are willing to go schedule the likes of Utah schedules Florida this year, Oregon schedules Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those games are huge if they're able to win them. I mean, Oregon did it a year ago and they went out and beat Ohio State. It was huge, but then they go and lose to Stanford, who only won 3 games last year, a couple of weeks later. Like that, the conference is so difficult up and down to win 9 games, especially if you schedule somebody who can beat you in the non-conference. So the expansion was the biggest thing. I think he'll address it. Unfortunately, it looks like it's going to play out this contract, which isn't great for the Pac-12 conference. You have to have a team that can step up, but the Rose Bowl stays intact. Pac-12 will represent in the Rose Bowl, and that's always the biggest bowl game there is. So like his mindset, like how he's interacting with coaches. He's walking onto campus and taking meetings with student athletes, hearing what they said. It's just something that Larry Scott did. And he was a guy at the very top that was trying to make things financially better. And the fact that the Pac-12 still owns their own network is meaningful, especially when these TV rights deals come up, because now it's not owned by ESPN or it's not owned by somebody else, but the Pac-12 network can now go out and really have people get into bidding wars. They can go to streaming services. They can do all these things. And that was the intent. So at the end of all of this, people may look back on the Larry Scott tenure after this next TV rights deal is done and think, well done, Larry, way of holding on to an asset that that is clearly appreciated in value like no other.
Well, and that's interesting too, because I think a lot of people, because of the headquarters being in San Francisco, there's a lot of hate that gets thrown to Larry Scott, but the idea that he might age better over time, especially on the national perspective, I think he gets a lot of hate. And I think that's a big problem for the Pac-12 as a whole. I've always been of the mindset that, I think the SEC, the Big Ten, right, I think they're a cut above, but I don't see this massive drop off between the ACC, the Big 12, or the Pac-12. I think there's fantastic talent in all 3 of those conferences, and I think they're all in that same bubble. But I do think nationally, for whatever reason, and it might just be there hasn't really been a dominant team really since the Chip Kelly Oregon squads. I think nationally it gets put as 5th, and I don't always think that's fair.
I don't think it's fair either. I think from top to bottom, it's the most competitive conference in the country. So I mean, if you're looking at the entirety of it, now, do we have an elite team that can go 13-0 every year in a championship and is in the conversation with the college football playoff? No, it just hasn't happened. We've had some teams that have risen to the top. We need the likes of USC to get back on that platform. And they went out and hired a guy that they feel will make a difference. We'll see how that ultimately plays out and how he can recruit to Southern California, where, people are just not as invested in college football as they are in the South, right? It just is a different scenario. So I don't like the rankings of, clearly the SEC is at the top just by how many NFL players get drafted out of that conference every single year. But yeah, I wouldn't dare place them at the 5th level. I'd place them more towards the top in terms of top to bottom success and skills. It's just a matter that they beat each other up a lot, and no one's beating Alabama or Clemson or whatever until this last year, really.
Well, and there's no other conference as the parity, right? I mean, if you like a conference that has Alabama and Vanderbilt top to bottom, then sure. But if you like a conference where it's for entertainment value, I think, and there's a reason people love Pac-12 after dark, right? There's a reason why
you really have no idea who's going to win each and every week, which I like. I like that.
For an entertainment value, I don't think there's anything better. You'll get a couple games in the SEC where Bama, Georgia, or Bama, Florida, and you'll get really entertaining games. But even with them, the gap between the haves and the have-nots in the SEC, I think hurts the regular season product a lot. And then once we get around to college football playoff time, it's like, oh yeah, the SEC is the best conference, blah, blah, blah. And then we always forget, oh yeah, but actually there's 12, 13 games that get played before you even get to that point to begin with. So maybe, let's try to enjoy that. And Oregon, I think that win last year over Ohio State was massive for the Pac-12, right? It felt like the first big
it was huge
conference win that the Pac-12's had in a long time.
And there's plenty of those this year too. There's plenty of those this year. I talked to you about the Utah, Florida game, Oregon, Georgia, Washington State, Wisconsin. I mean, those are some early games. And then USC and Notre Dame because of Lincoln Riley and the new coaching staff at Notre Dame too. So, I mean, there's plenty of opportunities. The bottom line is, over the years, or at least the last 5 years, we weren't winning those non-conference games. So there was nothing to really stand on. Last year with that victory, there was a real, Oregon didn't help their cause by losing to Stanford a couple of weeks later, because then everybody could go, wow.
Well, then they lost to Stanford, right? I guess that was a fluke, right? But they also did that without Kayvon Thibodeau, without, I think 2 of their starting linebackers. It's great.
Well, they lost their quarterback. Kayvon actually played in that game, but the Ohio State win? They did it without Floyd, and they did it without Thibodeau on the defensive side of the football. So yeah, it was that defensive coordinator got out schemed by Moorhead, and it was something to see. I mean, if you watch them run weak side with a pulling guard, they saw something on film, and Ohio State never corrected it.
Yeah. And it changed Ohio State season too. I want to do a little bit of draft stuff before we get you out of here. We were having a debate last week on the pod, the guys who usually do the pod with me, about quarterbacks in the NFL right now who haven't signed their long-term extension. And the other 2 guys took Herbert, and I took Joe Burrow. And the rationale for it, and they were taking upside, right? They were taking the talent. And I love Justin Herbert. I had him second on my list.
Well, I don't think either one of them are able to sign a long-term contract yet because they haven't played 3 years.
Yeah, it's just like if you were to rank the quarterbacks that are kind of due for that, who would you be most excited about? Who would you give that bag over as quickly as possible? They still have another, honestly, 2 years because of the 5th year option. But with the reason I picked Burrow was because I think it's just as important when you're talking about a franchise quarterback to talk about the person and deciding on the person as much as the player. And I think you're uniquely qualified about this because I think it pertains a lot to the draft. And as much as I love Justin Herbert, who I also think is a great person, there's the leadership, there's the charisma, there's the fact that Joe Burrow just took them to a Super Bowl, right? That I had him just slightly ahead of Justin Herbert, whereas the other viewpoint is the talent. So applying that same logic to the draft, there are guys in this year's draft who are incredibly talented. But would you lean, like, how much, what is that, 50-50, 60-40 towards I'm drafting this person versus I'm drafting this talent?
Well, I mean, talent has to override everything, it just does. And if there are red flags around behavior and personality, then that has to be deducted. But, you got to love the personality traits of all 3 of the top guys, I think, and Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett and Matt Corral. I mean, Matt Corral, for all the things he's gone through, the adversity he's overcome, finding Lane Kiffin at the time that he did, he can be something special for a franchise. And then you got guys like Sam Howell and Desmond Ridder, who are guys who've played forever and played a ton. And I think there really are 5 guys, and you throw in Carson Strong there, who has a ton of starts as well, big, strong kid. There's 6 guys that are very capable of leading organizations, whether teams move up too high and use unrealistic expectations on these young men is another thing, right? If Detroit says we're going to take Malik at 2, I don't necessarily think he's the number 2 overall pick in this year's draft, but he's going to have the expectations of that, and he's going to Detroit. So it's a lot about where you go and then how you deal with failure. Because guess what, boys, you're going to deal with a mountain of failure. A lot of people don't really fully understand that. Usually when teams are drafted that high, there's some failure to deal with, and it's how you deal with it, whether in a positive or healthy way. And, just look at what the Chargers and the Bengals did. They drafted the best players at the quarterback position. And I would argue they are neck and neck with one another. I would say that Justin Herbert's a more talented quarterback. I think he's the most talented quarterback in the NFL, to be honest with you. But Joe Burrow there's just an it factor. You get the Bengals to the Super Bowl in your second season after missing half the season. There's something about you, right? He changes the environment. I believe Justin does that too. They just need to be better at the coaching position and on the defensive side of the football, right? Yeah. Where Cincinnati did. They played better. They were better coached. If Staley doesn't make some of the mistakes he made last year in his coaching decisions, they're in the playoffs, right? And if Cincinnati could have gone, LA easily could have gone from their side of things.
No, and I'm, for the record, I am with you. Like, I have them both right here, and that's kind of where that, like,
I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if both of them like Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes are given that bag after their third year when they're eligible to sign an extension.
Yeah, and both will be absolutely deserving. The other thing you said too is, and I agree with this fully, is it's as much about where you go as who you are, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know, like that plays such a massive role in it. So I know you were high on Ole Miss last year. I know you love Corral. So where out of those top three, you know, is there a dream pairing between player and team that you could see working out that you think would be like, that would be scary if you got those things? Kind of like Mahomes in 2017, because Mahomes had all the talent in the world, but if he goes to probably 30 other teams, it's not as likely that he ends up being the face of the league like he is now.
No, it's a huge part of it, right? And I I've been speaking with Matt Corral a bunch about this, in that, hey, don't worry about where you go or when you go. Just, look at and almost look at the opportunity of being drafted later in the first round would be so beneficial, right?
Yeah.
I like his chances at a place like Pittsburgh. If he could fall there, that would be a neat event opportunity, especially with Matt Canada's offense. I think that RPO game, which he's the best in this year's draft class at doing,
Definitely
would make that incredibly difficult to defend with the players that they have. Najee Harris being able to run the football and then utilizing that behind it with the run pass option, those types of things. Kenny Pickett, for him, it's going to be entirely where he lands, because I don't think he fits in every situation. It's going to have to be the right place. Fortunately, Carolina seems to be a possible landing spot, and you're going to be in a position where you have a quarterback that you're fighting against that is more talented than you are, is more athletic than you are, and is making $19 million. And you have a coach that's going to probably be in a lame duck season. Either he goes to the playoffs or he's out on his tail after this year. So it's kind of a Justin Fields, Matt Nagy situation. You go and draft the future of your franchise possibly, but you're not going to be around to see it type of mentality. So it's tough. I do see a team swooping in at number 32 to do what the Vikings and what the Ravens have done in the past, to grab that guy so they could get the 5th-year option. So expect that somebody to trade with Detroit to pop in there at the end of the first round and make a splash.
Yeah, and Detroit can obviously use the draft picks. Last thing here, and then I'll let you go. You've been far too generous with your time. I love, and I mentioned it earlier, you go out, you speak to teams, you do a lot of public speaking. Do you have like a story or a moment that you can share with us and the listeners to kind of give that essence of when you've gone to a school, and obviously you can leave names out or whatever, but just the interaction you had with a player who, after you got a chance to talk to, just really sticks out into your mind, is like, wow, my story, this is why I'm doing this, because I have a chance to actually impact these kids' lives and show them, not necessarily like you said, not the wrong way to do something, right, but just to hopefully help change and help them grow.
Yeah, it's usually about choices, and just understanding what choices mean, and the wherewithal to understand that you have a choice when you come to a fork in the road, regardless, to deal with any situation in a positive and healthy way or a negative and toxic one. So I don't know if the pandemic had something to do with it, but last year's teams I spoke to really seemed to buy in. And there were many of them, because I give my phone number out to the entire team when I'm done speaking. And to see the amount of text messages I got that night and then throughout the season when things got tough. The biggest thing is people can go out and talk all they want about how they've dealt with mental illness and stuff like that, or if they're going through a hard time. The answer is behind the action. Like, do you reach out to somebody when you're struggling? Mm-hmm. Or do you still live in that stigma of like going, oh, I'm the big, strong football player, and Ryan was here and I'm going through exactly what he was feeling, but I don't want to look weak. And that's what the stigma is. And what I saw this last year from a lot of the guys I talked to, they didn't see the stigma. They saw like, oh, I'm struggling with something. I'm going to reach out to a guy that opened his arms to me. And I saw a lot of that I usually go to anywhere from 5 to 8 squads in the fall. And I anticipate doing that again this year because it's hugely beneficial to me. It's funny how when you find the life of your dreams or what what makes you feel most content has nothing to do with you and everything to do with somebody else. That's something that I didn't fully understand until I was humbled in the way I needed to be. And these organizations, these coaches that give me the opportunity to do it, give me that. They give me an opportunity to be of service, and it helps prolong and save my life. So that's wonderful.
That's amazing, man. And your generosity is felt today in this interview, and has been felt in the 3 years I've been lucky enough to know you and get to work with you. And I can't thank you enough for the time, dude. This was a ton of fun. Your story is amazing. Everybody go check out Bust on Spotify. You can also listen to him, Pac-12 Radio on SiriusXM channel 373, ESPNU Radio. You see him on ESPN, Sky Sports, Westwood One, at Ryan D. Leaf on Twitter. All this stuff. You're a media mogul, man. You're a media mogul. You're taking over.
Well, you know what? That it's amazing that everybody loves the opportunity. I will say this, and this is the insecurity in me, and so there's truthfulness to it. I would just love for somebody to say, Ryan, you're mine. I don't want you to go anywhere else. I want you right here with me always.
Just
instead they're just like, yeah, man, you're good. Go ahead, take him this weekend.
Yeah,
I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining.
That's amazing. Well, dude, thank you again. You're the best, and I appreciate it. And look forward to talking again soon, buddy.
All right, Gimp. Awesome to see you, man. Keep doing what you're doing.
Will do.